Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, Streamlining Conservation, Students, Stewards, and the Reintroduction of a Species, presented by Jim Knox. Jim serves as the Curator of Education for Connecticut's Beardsley Zoo, where he directs educational programming and conducts field conservation. Jim is a member of the prestigious Explorers Club. He has served as an on-camera wildlife expert for the Today Show and CBS Early Show, and has lectured for the Harvard College Conservation Society. We're really honored to have you with us today, Jim. Thank you very much, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Ted, thanks a lot. I really appreciate that intro, and I really appreciate the opportunity to present to all of you today. I also want to thank Kendall, and I want to thank Court Whalen for bringing everybody together so we could share our work and what we love doing here in Connecticut with the Natural Habitat Adventures community. So I really appreciate that at the outset. Conservation, as you all know, takes many shapes and forms. We're going to dive into the program today. My goal is to cover as much territory as we can and then get into the Q&A and get answers to your great questions. So with that said, we're gonna launch right now. You already know my bio. The one thing I will share with you, which is really important to know at the outset, is that I work for Connecticut's Beardsley Zoo and the Connecticut Zoological Society. This is a nonprofit that's a member of what's known as the AZA. Now, many of you may know the AZA. For those who don't, it is an organization of zoos, aquariums, and living museums who collectively share the care for more than 1 million animals around the U.S. and around the world. And this often takes the form of the care for endangered species, breeding program efforts for endangered subspecies and species, critically endangered creatures. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as we progress. Not every animal is endangered, but we want to do our utmost to keep it that way, right? So normally in a story of conservation, we're going to start, we have a nice story arc from beginning and excitement and drama in the middle, and then culmination and reward at the end. We're going to start at the end because I like eating dessert first, right? So we're going to start at the end. I'm going to show you guys, this is what happiness looks like. This is the celebration of a successful venture by a talented group of students and their educators from the Connecticut Zoological Society and Connecticut's Beardsley Zoo. But that exaltation marks the culmination of years of hard work by our zoo team. So I want to backtrack a little bit, and we'll bring you back up to this point in just a little bit. So like many conservation stories, the conservation effort that we put forth begins with a single conversation. And that single conversation took place in July of 2011 on the Friday after a busy week of Zoo Patrol. Now, my colleague, Justin Vaughn, who may make a cameo later in the presentation, is one of our administrators for this program. It's a great program that serves as a form of summer camp for students ages 6 to 11 who are interested in conservation. And we really, for many of these kids, it's their first exposure to the world of wild creatures and what we can all do to protect animals. With that said, I spoke with a grandmother at the end of this program, and she approached me and she said, I'd love to talk to you about this past week. My granddaughter had a great time, but there's more than that. I want to talk to you about your programming. And so I said, do you have time to walk? And we walked, I listened, we shared information. And it turns out that Pat McKean, who is an ardent supporter of our efforts here at the zoo, is not only a grandmother, but she's the founder of a group known as the SEC, or the Science Education Center of Greenwich. Now, Pat was a retired AP bio teacher. She taught at the middle school, high school, and college levels, very talented educator. And she and her colleague, Lizette Henry, they gathered together and they determined that we could do, or the SEC could do, right by students who wanted to learn about conservation science and conservation biology. In particular, their job was to attract funding and support for worthy programming in cities around Connecticut. And we were honored to have that conversation and explore this with them together. And what it resulted in was the formation of a TIC class. And TIC stands for Trout in the Classroom. Many of you may know the Trout in the Classroom. We'll get into some of the details a little later on. But this went from when you have a conversation with somebody who's trying to help you to start up a program, as a nonprofit educator, you've got your wish list front and center, ready to just rattle off. And there was a program that we were very excited about. We wanted to start, but we didn't have all the pieces in place. And this is what we're talking about. We had experience. We had more than a decade of experience working with our state wildlife agency here in Connecticut, the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, in particular the fisheries, the Inland Fisheries Division. And these are the ladies and gentlemen who work to preserve our inland fish species and also a species such as the Atlantic salmon, so anadromous fish like Atlantic salmon. In particular, Atlantic salmon were completely wiped out, extirpated, gone from Connecticut waters, not a salmon remaining. That effort, our volunteer effort, our staff effort collectively over many years resulted in our wildlife agency, Connecticut Deep, getting to know us, getting to know our level of commitment, getting to know our level of expertise, and getting to know our never say die attitude when it comes to conservation. So a lot of people think of a zoo, or in particular of our zoo, as their neighborhood zoo and a place where you can go and see animals, and that's absolutely true, but they don't necessarily know. And we have to be better about sharing the stories and the work that we do out there in the wild, because much of our work takes place beyond our campus, beyond our grounds, right? And so our educators, our volunteers, our zookeepers, our curators have been getting into Connecticut waters, into the river, and restoring populations of Atlantic salmon for all of these years. Now, to date, it's been 22 years. And in that time, they've restored between salmon fry and salmon fingerlings more than 1 million Atlantic salmon in Connecticut waters. If your sound cut out, 6 zeros after that one, right? It's a lot of effort, and we're very proud of that collective effort. But aside from any benefit it may have gone toward helping the species, it helped our conservation partners to know we're in it for the long haul. And that laid the groundwork for the restoration efforts of another species. Now, forgive the acuity or the detail on this slide, other than the color. I want you to focus on the color in this slide. This is a map of our state of Connecticut. The blue ranges on the map indicate intact, sustainable brook trout habitat. And as you can see, if you look down the center of the map, down the Connecticut River Valley and along the coast, our border with Long Island Sound, which is a projection of the Atlantic Ocean between Connecticut and New York, you notice that there's an absence of habitat there. And that is a result of more than 300 years of development and eventually industrialization in our state, which rendered some of these waters bankrupt of char, of brook trout, which are a relative of the trout and the salmon. So our brook trout lost ground. They lost watersheds, complete watersheds. And our goal, our ambitious goal, was to bring a species back to the Pequonnock River, which is the river that flows right through Bridgeport, Connecticut, our largest city in Connecticut, and right through Beardsley Park, which is adjacent to Connecticut's Beardsley Zoo. Now, this park is a Frederick Law Olmsted design park. So we have a legacy of conservation heritage right here at the zoo, right here in Bridgeport. Frederick Law Olmsted, for some of you, you may know, he's the father of American landscape architecture. He designed Central Park in New York, he designed parks throughout the US, and he designed parts and sections of the national park system for the US government. So a noted and most historic landscape architect, and his legacy here was one of a common ground where people could recreate and enjoy the wild right here in the largest city in the state. So how do we launch a program like this? What are some of the pieces that we have to assemble, and what are some of the synergies that we have to achieve? Well, we have to find caring people. And when I say caring people, I mean that both literally and figuratively. So the people that we found to help us in this effort, and the people who were happy who just jumped to the front of the line, were many of the state biologists who are active in a program known as CARE, the Connecticut Aquatic Resource Educators. And one of those gentlemen, and there are ladies and gentlemen in this program, but in this case he's a gentleman, his name is Tom Bourret, and Tom is one of the educators who helped us with our Zoo Patrol program, who helped teach our students in local middle schools and high schools, all ages, about the science and health of healthy rivers. We looked at species diversity. We looked at the interaction between various species, between predators and prey. We look at pollutants in the river. We look at all of these various aspects of conservation as they affect the Pequonnock River watershed, a 17-mile stretch of river that travels through 5 towns, empties into coastal Connecticut here at Bridgeport Harbor, and out ultimately to the Atlantic Ocean. And by teaching our students about the requirements of healthy habitat and the dynamics of healthy habitat, they have a picture as to what constitutes a place, a habitat where species can be released. So talking about the release, well, this trout in the classroom class is aspiring to do something which nobody had done before, at least not in our corner of the world, which is to head start fish between 4.5 to about 6 inches in length, get them back in the river, because at this size, we give them an exponentially greater chance of avoiding predation from those primary predators, right? Those primary consumers in our food chain here. So those heterotrophic animals like giant water bugs and belted kingfishers that will scarf up the little tiny guys, little tiny brook trout, but that will largely leave this size fish alone. So by giving these fish a head start, we've seen over time that this is a proven model that works for other species, and in particular, it gives them a tremendous advantage. But what does it entail on the student end, on the classroom end? And what it entails is quite literally, as well as figuratively, getting our feet wet, right? Getting into the river. One of the benefits of having the Pequonnock flow right by our door, and when I say right by our door, the river is in many places less than 1,000 feet from our zoo grounds. By having that river flow right past our door, we have a great natural classroom, a natural laboratory to explore, to experiment, to discover things about the river. And this comes in the form of discovery for the class, sometimes for all of us, and all the time, really, the constant is discovery for the individual student. But even though we're talking about an urban river, at least this section of the river, it's such a rich river in terms of its legacy and in terms of its biological footprint right now. We have a run of river herring that ascends this river every spring. From April to June, the river is jammed with alewives, with river herring, alewives and blueback herring. And these fish ascend the river, they swim up the fish ladder, they go out into the upper section of the river, and they attract all these top predators: American mink, North American river otter, osprey, bald eagles. They all come for the banquet, right? So this is a very robust river, even though it's been through some hard times. 300 years of change and industrialization, but the river is resilient. And that's what we bear in mind with our classes and with our students. Now, the lower section of the river needs some TLC. This image here is taken about a mile downstream from Connecticut's Beardsley Zoo. And we see how point source pollution can lead to a lower river, which has all the hallmarks of pollutants and lack of planning, a lack of urban planning. And this is not what we want for our river system in general, right? We know that we don't have the remedies for the entire river in one day or in a year, for example. But what we focus on with the students is improving our corner of the world, our backyard, so to speak, and working on their section of river. And they've adopted the section of river from US 1, the post road, as we say, or the Old Kings Highway, on up to the border with the next town, which is Trumbull, Connecticut. Now, the post road is the road that extends from coastal Maine with the border with Canada all the way down to Key West. It's a very busy corridor. A lot of commerce, a lot of activity, and if we can do it here, we can do it anywhere. This is the upper Pequonnock. So the slide I had at the intro was not just some pretty forest stream, it's actually the Pequonnock River. And this is the Pequonnock just about a mile upstream from Connecticut's Beardsley Zoo. So if you see, we've got a Class B trout stream that flows right by our door. So this is a perfect opportunity with great attributes to expose our classes to, dive in, enact those lesson plans, learn from everything, and then carry on our conservation work and see the changes, the progression from year to year. So one of the things we focus on before we even set foot in the river is the study of habitat. Now our curricula is really diverse. We have 7th and 8th graders from 2 middle schools here in the city of Bridgeport, Park City Prep, and Bridge Academy, and those students in a small cohort of just 16 students, just 8 students from each school, they gather together, the 7th and 8th graders, to learn these lesson plans and then to get involved in the science of conservation. When they're learning these lesson plans, we have a staggered approach so that this year's 7th graders graduate to become next year's 8th graders, and they mentor the younger students. But before they do any of this work, they're studying the river as a living thing, right? Because the river, in a very real sense, is a living thing. They're studying the habitat requirements of a Class B river here in Connecticut. They're studying the species present and, just as importantly, the species absent. So one of the ways they do that, and one of the ways we get a snapshot as to the health of the river, is by doing a macroinvertebrate survey. Macroinverts, as many of you may know, are big little creatures without backbones, right? So what we do is we have the students, they form a line in the river, and we're in there in the water with them, we've all got our waders on, and they're shuffling through the river. And the river's about maybe 12 to 18 inches deep at this point. We take them to a relatively shallow section, and they're kicking up debris over the cobble in the river. And that debris gets washed down in the nets, and their classmates have the nets down there, and they are scooping up caddisflies and stonefly nymphs, their dragonfly nymphs, fingernail clams, crayfish. They're looking at those invertebrates. And if you see on that image there, if you see just below the boys there, you're going to see some ice cube trays. And what they do is they separate the individual animals and put them in each little ice cube portion of the tray. And by doing that, they then compare it to a key. We key it out. We see which species are present in that section of the river. And then we have a profile as to the suitableness of the river, the appropriateness for release for an animal species such as brook trout, which have very specific habitat requirements. So further downstream, maybe not so suitable. Further upstream, maybe quite suitable, but maybe not an area they can access. So we're very fortunate we've got that sweet spot, that Goldilocks zone of wildlife reintroduction right here in the park. One of the other things when we're exploring habitat that we dive into is pollution and human inputs, human actions and habitat reactions. And we do this through an exercise known as the Enviroscape. And the Enviroscape is basically a water lab where the students will simulate pollutants from different aspects of human activity, from dairy farms, from factories and industry, from oil spills from cars, from people changing their oil. And we simulate this deposition of pollutants into the river system, and then they can visually see how our human actions have habitat and ecosystem reactions. We use everything, of course, which is non-toxic to simulate this, and our pollutants, if you will, of choice include chocolate sprinkles, rainbow sprinkles, black cherry jello, lime jello, and those little green and red Christmas cookie sprinkles. So this slurry goes into the water table below. And I learned year one, I didn't learn my lesson. Year two, I forgot my lesson. Year three, I said, hey, guys, you're gonna help me clean it up. So from year three onward, our students not only do the exercise, which is very messy, conservation can be messy, they clean it up, they have a blast doing this. And that's the one thing we never wanna overlook, that it's perfectly acceptable, in fact, desirable to have fun while we're doing science. While we're conducting conservation, we wanna roll up our sleeves, it's hard work, right? It can be sweaty, it can be cold, it can be muddy, but ultimately, we wanna enjoy the process. And speaking of enjoyment, there's a sense of wonder that we can't simulate. It's just there, it's authentic, and it happens. And if you look at our students doing seine netting there with Tom on the left and Neil at 12 o'clock in the image, you're gonna see some of our students right there up by Neil and over here at 3 o'clock, eyes wide open, mouths agape, saying, oh my gosh, what is that in the seine net? What did we just capture? And what they've just captured in this case, which is hard to see, but we'll see in just a moment in better detail, are American eels, some rock bass, and some largemouth bass. And those fish are present in the river system here. And the American eels have the power to inform a reintroduction of other species because they have many of the same challenges facing their habitat reclamation. This is an image of an American eel, not surprisingly. A lot of our students, when they start the program, they don't even know what this creature is. They think it might be a snake. They don't know. And even when they hear it's an eel, they back up and they say, what is that? And then they take a step and a half forward and they say, what is that? They're very excited. We teach them about the habitat requirements of American eels, how these fish are catadromous. They are living here in streams and rivers in Connecticut. They are swimming out to the Atlantic Ocean, the Sargasso Sea, and coming back as part of their life cycle. And they see the connections between river, Long Island Sound, the Atlantic Ocean, and back again, and how these different systems are all interconnected. A big part of our program centers around data observation, data collection, data sharing, and collaborating with other agencies, with not only Connecticut Deep, but with universities. So our students here are studying rock bass and sunfish in particular, and they are taking very, very small biopsies, which don't harm the fish, a little tiny little fraction of a millimeter biopsy from the pectoral fin of a sunfish or a creek chub. And that's helping to preserve a record of the fish's presence in the river without harming the fish, and by documenting the date, the locality data of that species in 2015 or 2020, so that 100 years from now, we can look back and we'll have that great data set. We also study eDNA, or environmental DNA, and that DNA we work in conjunction with our state wildlife agency, who again, by extension, we leverage our connections here and our partnerships. They work with the University of Connecticut and the University of Maine to study environmental DNA, and then they share their findings with our class. So our 7th and 8th graders are field scientists. They're legitimate field scientists before high school, gathering their data, they're sharing it with academia, they're getting that data back, and that helps to inform their classwork. And then based on what we hear back and based on the amount of information we're learning from class, from session to session, we can take a different trajectory perhaps. We can explore something a little bit more, dive a little deeper. The lessons that the students receive in the trout in the classroom in our particular class here at the zoo, which is quite unique in the state of Connecticut, they have lessons in history of the river. They journal. They talk about their individual fish, not just the fish in population, not just the species, but individual fish. What they do is, depending on the size of the school of fish that we raise in a given year, not only are they providing care or husbandry for the fish and conducting water chemistry, but they'll take images of the fish, and we look at the dorsal side of the fish, the top or the back of the fish. Now, brook trout are unique in that they've got this series of swirling patterns on their back known as vermiculations. It means worm-like markings, and each one of them, just like a tiger's stripe pattern on their face, is unique to that individual. So our students, by getting to know the pattern on the fish's back, they get to know the fish, and they name the fish, and they journal about the fish, and they write poetry about the fish. So we're not just studying chemistry and biology, but we're studying history and English and mathematics, and we blend all of this in this program. That aspect to it is so gratifying for the educators because it keeps the program from falling into a channel each year. We change it up every year. I'm just looking to advance, and there we go. There, my slide just caught up on there. All right. So here we see one of our students working with Neil, and what they're doing is they're actually taking a very small pectoral sample. It's hard to see that, but a pectoral fin sample, a biopsy from a creek chub, which is a small minnow-like fish that lives in the river system as well. And by sampling different species of fish, we not only document the biodiversity, but we're also looking at the relative habitat requirements and preferences of different species, and we can study how different species in different sections of the river may interact. What the students do is they record everything on the computer. They also record everything longhand. And here we have Bunnell Pond. Bunnell Pond is a name for the pond-like section below the zoo of the river. We have a fish ladder, and we have a small dam that's about 22 feet in height, and that holds back a section of river here so that we have different aspects of habitat within a very small stretch of river. Within a mile, we've got pond-like conditions, and we've got riffle conditions further upstream, and we've got some deeper pools just below the dam. Here we see a section about half a mile downstream of Connecticut's Beardsley Zoo. And this photo was taken from the bridge that is on the post road, the Kings Highway, US 1, one of the busiest small highways, if you will, in the US. And we're looking down on the section of River Point facing to the north, and you see the students in those blue shirts. Those students are the older teen group that we have at Connecticut's Beardsley Zoo. They're known as the Conservation Discovery Corps. Further down, we see some students in darker blue shirts. Those are students who are members of the Zoo Career Explorers, which is a program that introduces students to the conservation work of zoos and aquariums. We also have student stewards from the city of Bridgeport, and we've got zoo employees and horticulture Vicky there with the shovel, and my friend Jean over there next to the gentleman from the city of Bridgeport in the green vest. She's one of our animal care folks. Everybody gets involved in this. This is the planting activity. This was on one of the days in the spring. We have a lot of activities that center around Earth Day, Party for the Planet, and similar such events. And over time, our students and our staff and our other volunteers, our zoo gardeners, have planted well more than 2,000 plantings along the river, not only from the post road on up, but depending upon the placement, some of these are shrubs, some of these are ground hugging plants. They stabilize the bank, and ultimately the trees that we plant will provide canopy cover further upstream in particular. I want to point out, if you look into the background of the photo, right as the river takes a slight turn there, that's a fish weir that the zoo assisted with the implementation of that. We worked with the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. They did all the heavy lifting, trust me, but they created a weir so that the fish can have a protection from the current when the current is surging in the spring, so that fish such as alewives and river herring can ascend the river. We're talking about 40, 50, nearly 60,000 fish descending in a period of maybe 6 weeks. And that's a holdover pool so they can survive the journey. Like I said, it's a classroom like no other. It is fun, and that's the one aspect of conservation we never want to lose sight of, because the fun is what keeps us going during the hard times, right? And here our students are raising their hands, talking with Tom, and talking with Neil in particular, and they're learning about, in this case, American eels. Maintenance of habitat is everything, right? Creating the right habitat or restoring habitat is key, but maintaining it, that's everything. If you have the home, you can have the species and reintroduce it to that wild home, but you have to maintain that habitat. So what our river stewards here have done, they've hauled, if you look at the garbage there front and center, including our entire, that haul I believe was 167 pounds of garbage, refuse pulled from the river. They do this under close supervision from zoo staff, and it's done safely. They don't go out into the deep water, and we're monitoring every effort there. But my point is that they adopt a section of river, and they're exhibiting a true stewardship ethic by ensuring that river habitat is protected. They protect the habitat, you can protect the species. Now, the power of mentoring is something which is really, really tough to quantify, and yet it's a very real and tangible and powerful thing. If you look at the right there, if you look on the right side of the image, you see Maggie, who's one of our zoo educators, who's gone on to higher education now. And Maggie is working with one of our 7th graders to reintroduce a single specific brook trout that student adopted for care into the river. And you see one of the 8th graders looking on and encouraging them in mentorship. Those 8th graders are rock stars. I mean, they are helping the 7th graders, are taking them under their wings. One of the key benefits from our Trout in the Classroom class structure is that of empowerment through public speaking. Our students they're feeling their autonomy, they're feeling their expertise. They share what they know, they share what they learn, and they are stronger, and so they're stronger for it, and they're so impressive, these kids, I tell you. Also, and this is one aspect of the program which is nearly intangible, and yet it's so telling and so informing when it comes to the activities and the decisions that we make as we grow older. Our 7th and 8th graders, so many of them, we take them out on the Pequonnock River for at least one day throughout the school year, sometimes 2, as a culminating exercise to go out there in the river and fish. And these young anglers, for so many of them, by the way, this is catch and release fishing with barbless hooks. So they're doing right by the animals, but they're also doing right by themselves in that they're experiencing the benefits of sound conservation practice. And the smiles are they're beaming. They're so happy. For so many of these kids, this is the first time they've ever caught a fish. And they tell us that all the time. Now, I have 3 kids. I get emotional when my kids catch fish. I know, I'm like pathetic, but I get emotional when my kids catch fish because it's like it's their communion with the wild world around them. And whether it's in the largest city in the state or along the Appalachian Trail, this is the same universal thing that has connected people with nature for millennia. And the connections don't have to just be solely focused on that reintroduction effort and the person with the fish in hand going into the water. We have our students participate in different activities. They take turns. So some of our students serve as wildlife documentarians, wildlife cinematographers. Some of them journal about their findings here, and they share them and they read them aloud to the class. But everybody's got a role to play, and everybody gets to change up and tackle those different roles and find what they really love and what they get excited about, because this is going to propel them from 7th, 8th grade, high school, college, and beyond. And that's how they truly do become champions of wildlife. Our biodiversity inventory, this is just a quick image. I wanted to share this with you. We have so many species present in the river, and without the help of our conservation partners like Connecticut Deep, the city of Bridgeport, both staunch supporters of our work and shoulder-to-shoulder conservation bodies in their own right. Pequonnock River Initiative and Save the Sound, who safeguard the well-being of the waters in the Pequonnock River Watershed and Long Island Sound, respectively. And of course, the Science Education Center of Greenwich. These are folks who all have an interest in seeing a program like this move forward. They helped us from day one, and they are still there. 9 years into the program, they are still there for us. And that's one of the reasons that we know that things are working. We have that enduring, unified commitment. The conservation in the program is literally at their fingertips. These are 2 American eels that the students were able to catch and release in the river and study briefly for about, in this case, about 15 minutes. In situ, as you may know, in situ conservation is conservation in the field. And one of the great benefits to having the individuals, the talented individuals in this program and having this great natural classroom is that we could do field conservation, not in the Serengeti, not in the Amazon, not in the polar regions, but field conservation in the largest city in our state. So a profile of the program by the numbers. How does this reintroduction actually look? Well, let's share some of the finer aspects and nuances of the program through these numbers. 2012, we launched Trout in the Classroom at Connecticut's Beardsley Zoo. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this before, and I don't want to forget to mention it, so here I go. Brook trout were native to the native salmonid or salmon-like species here in Connecticut, along with Atlantic salmon, when this country was pioneered in this country and New England was established as colonial presence. But those fish are the most sensitive to change. So those are the ones that were most quickly extirpated from any of these watersheds. What we've done is we approach Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. The biologists and the administrators in the department, they looked at our conservation practice, they looked at our commitment, and they looked at our expertise in particular. And I personally made a plea to them. I said, can we please reintroduce brook trout? Because they're the only native species that is true to this body of water and that falls within the parameters of this program. And there are thousands of Trout in the Classroom chapters around the US. There are more than 100 of them in the state of Connecticut, more than 100 Trout in the Classroom class setups. And of those, we were granted permission. We're the only one. It's a privilege and a responsibility, and we take it very seriously. So in that first year, in 2012, when we launched this program, we had 0 brook trout in the Pequonnock River. 5, that next number there, the number of inches of growth to head start these fish to protect them from most of these predators. 16, the very small cohort of students that enables us to provide excellent focus to our conservation tasks at hand. 24, the number of fish introduced in the first year. This next figure is very, very important. 75 is the minimum threshold percentage for our young women in science in the TIC, or the Trout in the Classroom here at the zoo. We established this in conjunction with Pat and with Zed, the founders of SCC, because it was important to them as grandmothers, as educators, myself as a dad of young women. It was important for us to give girls in science pathways, avenues for success at an early age in areas that have traditionally been male dominated. 500, the minimum number of fish released to date. It's actually edging up close to 600, I'm happy to say. And 2,000, we covered that before, but the minimum number of bank stabilizing and canopy forming plants that our students and volunteers and staff have planted. So when it comes to species in general, the work that we do here at the zoo, we work with many more species than brook trout. In fact, we work with about 120 species, many of them critically endangered. About 5 years ago, I was helping to facilitate a tour here at the zoo for some of our underwriters. One of the gentlemen toward the back of the group, a group of about 25, 30 folks, he said, how do you guys introduce endangered species back into the landscape? It's got to be daunting. And I answered him very candidly. I said, it's not cheap, it's not easy, it takes time, it takes hard work and focus, but you don't start with Andean condors and you don't start with red wolves. You start with brook trout and you start in the 7th grade. And that's exactly what we did. And he wanted to learn more about the program. And then from there, we chatted and we had another supporter of our work. With that said, oh, by the way, that year in 2015, we released our Andean condors, our pair here in Connecticut, back into the wilds of Colombia and the Andes. So I don't know if I mentioned that before. I was thinking it. I don't know if I said it, but there you go. That marks the culmination of so much effort. We don't always have that advantage in the SSP or species survival plan programs, but when we got it, boy, are we excited. Ted, if you could please do us a favor, if you could cut to the video, I think we're ready to see that video of some of the release, and we'll go from there.
That was great. Thank you very much, Jim. We're going to switch to a video now. It takes a few seconds for this to load up. So as I get it ready, I just want to let everybody know that if you have any trouble seeing the video, it may be open. If you're on a desktop, it may be open in a window that is behind the window you have open. So make sure you look around for that extra window. And if you're on a mobile phone, you may need to swipe left or right to be able to see it. Jim is going to talk over this video to give us a little bit of an overview of it. Jim, just a reminder that you'll need to unmute yourself to be able to do so. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play here. And
okay, thanks, Justin. We just got the unmute going, and here we are releasing some of the brook trout into the river here. This particular release was predicated or based upon some very cold weather moving into the region when the kids were off on break. So we had to take advantage of our narrow window and get the fish back in the river. Now here we see some of the lighter colored fish, or fish that were just released from the zoo, and we see some darker colored fish in the background perhaps. Those brook trout have been established in the river from year to year. Here we see some of our GoPro footage. Our students are recording the fish release from the shallows of the river. And as you can see, they just take to it right away. They're diving into the river and they're looking for cover in the cobble there. This section is one of the best sections for release because it's got a lot of football-sized cobble, which provides great hiding spots for these young fish. And here our students are releasing them in singly or in pairs. And that's our release visually. Now we're going to go back to, I want to share one or two other things with you in summation. Thank you. All right, Justin comes. Thank you so much, Justin. All right, Justin got us to red wolves. So what do red wolves have to do with brook trout? Actually, surprisingly, an awful lot. Brook trout and red wolves both benefit from intense focus. These are species, one aquatic, one terrestrial, but these are species that were native to the eastern US and have lost ground significantly. Red wolves were nearly wiped out. They nearly passed into extinction. Many of you may know the history of red wolves, but red wolves were down to just 12 animals in the early 1970s, just 12 animals, which is a very sobering statistic. And from that nucleus, that very small population, red wolves have been collectively managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and by members of the AZA, the zoos that I mentioned before. One of the key contributors to that program is the Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium, combining both the terrestrial and aquatic expertise in Tacoma, Washington, and our zoo here, Connecticut's Beardsley Zoo. We were one of the founders in this program. Over the years, we've raised red wolves. We've transported them to wild release stations in Tennessee and North Carolina. The current wild release site is Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge in coastal North Carolina. Currently, red wolves are facing a really big uphill challenge, but I am hopeful that in the coming years that they will do far, far better. Their numbers have dwindled in the wild, but their population is stable and slightly growing. So we're going to do our part. We are not going to relent, and we're going to do everything we can so that we have these animals out in the wild. But again, a reintroduction from a wolf to a trout, or a char in this case, not too dissimilar. The basics are all there. By protecting the habitat, you can protect the animal, and you can get them back on their footing. In closing, people also often ask us, what does conservation look like in 2015 and 2018 and 2020? What is the face of conservation? And we say, these are the faces of conservation. They're happy, the faces of accomplishment, euphoric, some of the same faces you saw at the beginning there. They're faces that reflect incredible hard work and focus and caring and a job well done, very well done. So in this case, these are our students right after the release, and we're really proud of them. We're really proud of our staff and our volunteers. I know our time is short. I want to dive into questions. So thank you all for your attention to this point, and let's launch into some questions.
Sounds great, Jim. Thank you very much for your fantastic. Before we dive into the Q&A, I just want to remind everybody that you are able to submit any questions you have via the question field in the control panel. Jim, the first thing I want to share, a number of people have commented on what a wonderful and impressive program this is. One listener in particular said, speaking of the students, to be in their own backyard and to live with the benefits of their whole life as long as they live in that city, and to transfer this conservation passion to wherever they need later. But just congratulations, like it was really, really fantastic the work that you're doing here, and I thank you for that. So,
thanks.
Yeah. The question that came in earlier on when you were first talking about the fish reintroduction, talking about the fish being a key species there. How do you know when there are too many or too few, or what is the correct amount of fish to release or to have in that particular ecosystem?
That's a great question. What we do is we rely on the graduated expertise, the expertise on our staff, our homegrown expertise here at our facility, but also our counterparts who are charged with and entrusted with the preservation of the fish populations in the state here. Our Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection biologists. So we work with people like Tom and Neil and Brian, and we talk to them about our plans for release in a given year. And what they typically do is our status is somewhat like certain wolf reintroductions around the U.S. Technically, it's classified as experimental, non-essential. So not that the stakes aren't high for the student and for the fish, of course, and for us, but this is considered a population that without the work of our students and our staff and our team here, our volunteers, would not be living in this river. So what they typically do, the state biology crew, they will allot us in a given year between 50 and 150 or so. I think our highest number has been about 180. Fry or fingerling brook trout. And then we raise them in 1 to 2 tanks that have chillers here, 1 or 2 closed systems. And because we have to keep the water chilled, and when we release the fish, we have to release it within about 2 degrees of that river temperature, so we don't induce any stress to the fish, any undue stress. So we are relying on the state biologists to provide us with fish that we can. Their basic answer to that question, to our question about that, which we've posed to them, is what is your carrying capacity? We've determined that our carrying capacity is based not on fish, but is based on grams, it's based on the amount of biomass in a given tank. But typically what that translates to for fish is anywhere between 25 relatively large 4-inch or so fish to maybe 180 or so fry little guys.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to combine 2 questions into the one that are related here. What effect does the polluted water near the coast have on the fish trying to swim up or down the river? And what efforts are being made to clean up the water in the Pequonnock River? Sorry if I'm saying that wrong.
No, you said it right. That's an excellent question. Actually, this is good because these are some of the same questions we're posing to our counterparts out there. I don't know if I have the absolute answer because I don't know that the answer is as quantifiable as I want it to be, but I'll share what I know. There are different sites along the Long Island Sound that were Superfund cleanup sites, federal Superfund cleanup sites. So there are federal monies that go toward empowering and financing our state cleanup efforts here in Connecticut on the North Shore of Long Island Sound, for one. There is periodic dredging. That dredging has to be done very carefully in conjunction with the EPA. That dredging takes place in Bridgeport Harbor. what we're typically looking at when it comes to the fish ascending the river, from everything we gather based on temperature and based on the known movements of these fish that travel out to Long Island Sound and out to the edges of the Atlantic and back, is that these fish are doing it in a very brief window, and they're doing it with a given tide. So they're coming up, they're ascending with a high tide, and they're ascending the river, and then they're going up the fish ladder, and then they're in. So they're not spending a tremendous amount of time in the harbor. To the contrary, very little, perhaps just a period of hours in the case of some fish. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So with respect to the students, over the years, have these young people been tracked in order to see how this introduction to conservation or into this world of impacts, how that impacts their ongoing education, their interests in college and beyond and into their professional careers?
Yes and no. Okay. So let me tell you, our tracking, if you will, is contingent upon the students' willingness to keep in touch with us. And we do talk to our students all the time. We do stay in touch to the extent that they're willing to. These are young people that they're very busy. They've got a busy social life. They've got busy academic life. They're doing a million things. But with that said, many of our trout in the classroom students, some of them actually, I should say, they will go on to study at a local high school, which has a zoological studies program. And that high school is known as Fairchild Wheeler High School, which is a district magnet school. So we have a very good relationship with Fairchild Wheeler, the principal, and the bio teachers, and so on. So we stay in close touch with those students that kind of pursue that track. We also work with students outside the TIC program through a school right around the corner on the border of Fairfield, Connecticut, known as Discovery Magnet School, which pulls from 8 towns. And these students, we have a biodiversity program we run with them, and they have their own trout in the classroom chapter. So we work with them on some collaborative programs. And we also, those students stay in touch with us because we have a lot of mission alignment, a lot of carryover. I will tell you in short, when it comes to our Conservation Discovery Corps and our Zoo Explorers, our next level students, the high school students, it's easier to stay in touch with those guys and gals because they really, at that age, they have the maturity and the desire to say, hey, I'm looking at a college internship. I want to volunteer, right? So with those students, we know that collectively, some of those students have gone into military service, they've gone on to college. Some of them have taken jobs within AZA institutions, and specifically, I'll tell you that the AZA folks, we have 2 students now who graduated from our teen program, and they're working for the Houston Zoo, and they've actually established a teen program at the Houston Zoo based upon their experience here in 2008 and 2009. So we have two young ladies there in their education department, and we have students at University of California in Santa Barbara. We have students at Fairfield University, University of Central Florida, UConn, Cornell, Harvard, NYU. They're all over.
Very cool. A couple of questions here about red wolves. That captured people's attention quite quick at the end there. Were red wolves from zoos brought in to mate with wild red wolves to increase genetic diversity in the remaining 12 red wolves?
It's a really good question. Actually, the 12 wolves, we need a separate topic. If we had like another hour, man, we could dive into this. But I'll tell you that the red wolves that were gathered in the American Southeast on the Texas-Louisiana border, those animals form the nucleus for every red wolf on the planet today. Because red wolves were so endangered in the early 1970s, they were hybridizing with coyotes. So they were breeding themselves into oblivion. So what we've done, what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did was they brought those red wolves in from the wild, and they only bred those red wolves with each other. So they effectively have a genetic bottleneck. The silver lining on this very sobering number of 12 animals, in the last few years, researchers from the University of Michigan Tech, I should say, Michigan Tech University and Princeton University have done genetic studies on a species of wolves on Galveston Island State Park in Texas. They've determined that those wolves are very close in their haplotype, very much red wolves. Slight bit of hybridization with coyotes, but almost pure red wolves. And that gives us hope for genetic wealth out there in the environment that was unknown for decades now. I love red wolves. I'm a red wolf geek. Make no mistake about it. Maybe we can talk more in the future.
Well, I've got one more red wolf question for you then.
Sure.
How do you teach red wolves to hunt before releasing them into the wild?
That's the question that we posed to the Fish and Wildlife Service biologists that we worked with over the years. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has acclimation pens or acclimation sites, which they're, from what I understand, about 2 acres in size. They're fairly sizable, and within those enclosures, they are providing the red wolves with some of the natural foods that they would find within the environment in Alligator River, which include raccoon, cottontail rabbit, white-tailed deer, wild turkey. So their prime prey species are represented in their feeding, and they also do aversive training with cars, with blaring of car horns and car lights, and with American alligators, mock American alligators, because alligators and cars represent the number 1 and 2 sources of mortality for these animals in the wild.
Awesome. All right. Is the back now to the program and the students. The program, is it being copied in other places, specifically as it relates to other school programs? Have you been able to share the model with other districts in your state or in other states?
The answer is yes, in a very general sense, and I'll explain. We have a variant or variation of the trout in the classroom model here at our facility. Our model is slightly different in that it's kind of inverse, in that we have the classroom here at the zoo and the wild classroom adjoining the zoo. So we have the benefit of the river right there, which very few schools anywhere have. We also have the benefit of reintroducing the only native species under that banner of quote unquote trout, the brook trout, which is actually char, but that's another question perhaps. With that said, there are lessons that carry over from one chapter to another. And yes, we do work with our Discovery Magnet chapter, and we work with other chapters around the state to share best practices. We don't propose to know it all. We just know what works for our little corner of the world, and it works really well due to the dedication of our staff and just their hard work.
Cool. And a question came in earlier. How are students chosen for your program? How do you choose or identify the students to participate?
These are very targeted questions. This is great, because these are the questions we get from parents and from educators. We choose the students by proxy. We talk to our teachers in the schools, in Park City Prep and Bridge Academy, and we talk to them and we say, these are stipulations for admission to the program, because we want to keep the interest and the engagement high from day one, and we want to perpetuate that. So some of the requirements include an A average. B+ is okay. If the students are working hard and their grades drop a little bit, that's okay. But we're looking for students who are really strong in science. They have to write an essay describing their interest in the program and their desire to participate in the program. And they have to have the recommendation of either their science teacher or their science coordinator or both. If the grades dip or if behavior is a problem, which normally isn't the case, we free up that space and we tell the student, look, you're free to reapply later on, but it's not working right now. It doesn't happen often at all, but by keeping the kids serious, focused, our engagement is high and our attrition is very low.
Great. And are you able to offer this program to low-income students, or is the diversity of backgrounds pretty well represented, or have the opportunity to participate?
The students in this particular, in our program, are generally lower income students. They're all City of Bridgeport residents. Some of the students who have the crossover students who we work with Discovery Magnet School, they come from 8 different towns. But the students here that we work exclusively with in our class, in our Trout in the Classroom class, are City of Bridgeport residents, and many of these students would be classified as lower income.
I see. Great. All right. The last question that of course everybody's asking about everything this year. How has the program been affected by COVID?
It's a really good question, and it is, what we're doing now is we are hoping for some more latitude with the program for the spring term. For the fall, just erring on the side of caution, we've pledged with our educators in the schools, and we pledged to our students that we will be there for them in the spring when they feel that they are able to venture off grounds. Right now, we have certain constraints placed on us by the schools, and that many of the schools are saying no off-campus activities for any of our students, regardless of the ability to space, say in the span of a section of river. So we're doing a ton of virtual programming, and my colleague Justin, who will make a cameo before the end, he's gonna jump in here, I promise. Justin and Jen Farrell, one of our other educators, they're doing amazing work getting our programming out to the students in Park City Prep, Bridge Academy, and beyond. So we're still conducting programming, but Trout in the Classroom hands-on programming is on hiatus until we can get approvals. We can do it safely. 2021 is going to be better. That's all there is to it.
Excellent. Thanks for that. Well, with that, I'm going to wrap us up here a little bit. Jim, if you want to have Justin come on and give a little wave or whatnot, and if you have any closing comments for the audience, this is an opportunity for that.
Thanks, Ted. I just want to reiterate my thanks to you, Ted, Kendall, to Court, to the entire Natural Habitat Adventures community. Really appreciate the opportunity to share our work with you today. I just want to wish everybody a very happy and safe holiday season and a great 2021. So thank you, guys.
Thanks so much, Jim. We really appreciate it. Your enthusiasm was infectious, and the work that you're doing there is just really, really inspiring, and an honor to have a chance to learn more about it. I also want to thank everybody who was able to join us today. Please be sure to join us next week for another set of Daily Doses of Nature. We did record today's presentation, and we'll have that replay available on our website soon, and you'll also be receiving it in a follow-up email. And with that, I'm going to conclude the webinar today. Hope everybody has a lovely weekend. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.